The Imperial Star Destroyer is arguably the most famous capital ship in the entire Star Wars galaxy. It powered the Empire's war machine, then was adopted by the New Republic, the Galactic Alliance, and other major factions. The Imperial Star Destroyer was a blunt tool, 1.6 kilometers long, extremely well armed, capable of standing up to most capital ships in a head-to-head battle, but also inefficient, heavily flawed, arguably geared too heavily for full capital ship combat considering the multi-purpose role it was often thrust into. Similarly to its flagship, the Empire as it existed at its peak was a large and bloated mess. However, after the Galactic Civil War, the Empire fractured. Initially, factionalism split the unity of the Empire into smaller groups, which saw their assets and territory lost due to infighting. Losses were furthered by the subsequent deaths of Thrawn, the reborn Emperor, and the failures of Natasi Dalla and the Imperial Remnant generally during the Orinda campaign. Thus, the remaining elements of the Empire left the core and dug into a small region in the Outer Rim, their glory days now a fairly distant memory. And even throughout the Yuuzhan Vong War and the Swarm War, the Remnant was unable to re-expand, and was forced to be content working with the Galactic Alliance as a secondary power in the galaxy. I say this because the government and military of the Empire transformed from being expansive and bloated to compact, efficient, and even intelligently ran. This was due largely to Pellaeon, who helped keep the Moffs in line and made lots of decisions that were strictly in the best interest of the Empire, while keeping the faction from being so comically evil. I've explained all this because by the end of the Swarm War, the Empire's new attitude was reflected in their newest class of warships, the Turbulent Star Destroyer. Now, unfortunately, the Turbulent never actually appears in secondary Star Wars material like the Essential Guide to Warfare because it was introduced in 2008, which was fairly late in Legends continuity. What's more, we've never even had an official photo or render of the vessel, so if I do include some in this video, they are fan work, and I've indicated as such on screen with links to the original artist in the description. That notwithstanding, we do get a pretty good description of the ship from the Legacy of the Force series. The only named Turbulent class is the Bloodfin, named after horse-like creatures native to Galad Pellaeon's much-loved Bastion. Pellaeon, who had assumed the role of Chief of State in the Imperial Remnant after resigning as the Supreme Commander of the GA military, transferred his flag to the Bloodfin, choosing the Turbulent as his new flagship as he prepared to represent the Imperial Remnant in the ongoing Civil War. Mirroring New Republic design doctrine, the Turbulent was smaller and more agile than an Imperial Star Destroyer, but was also described as very powerful. It could likely output a similar amount of damage, but was often described as being fairly sturdy. The small size but decent power, coupled with the ship's speed and maneuverability, led some to refer to the Turbulent as a pocket Star Destroyer. We don't know the ship's exact length, but at one occasion Jason states that it's smaller than the Anakin Solo, which was likely a regular-sized Imperial II. The Bloodfin is described as very complex, with hallways and shafts snaking throughout the ship. Legacy of the Force talks about how critical portions of the Turbulent were placed near the middle of the ship at the most protected areas. This may indicate that the Turbulent dispatches with the Imperial-style command tower in favor of a more streamlined design like on the Nebula, but it could also mean that there was a redundant bridge within the ship, or that I've read it wrong, and that the critical portions are actually sensors or communication equipment. We also know that the Turbulent had at least 2 hangars near the front of the ship, and presumably it also had a fairly large ventral hangar. We know from the Star Wars Encyclopedia, the only secondary source where turbulents are mentioned, that the ship line entered service sometime after the Swarm War. I think it's pretty unlikely that the Bloodfin was the first ship of the line, which I imagine would be called the Turbulent, but it was not only brand new, but still getting final touches just before the Battle of Fondor. Speaking of Fondor, the Empire dispatched a fleet of at least 20 Star Destroyers to that battle, and presumably some of these would have been the new Turbulents, while others are described as larger classes that could have been Imperial Star Destroyers or battle cruisers. A gradual introduction of a new ship at this point does make a lot of sense. By the Second Galactic Civil War, Imperial II Star Destroyers were really out of date. Some ships, like the Anakin Solo, were still in service, but they had to be heavily modified to remain viable. The fact that Pelion took one of these Turbulents as his new flagship, and the way other characters talk about the class, lead me to believe that the Turbulent would have eventually replaced the Imperial line as old ships were phased out. I think that makes sense as well. The Turbulent would have cost less resources to make because of its smaller size, and would have required a lesser crew, which I think is appropriate for the much smaller Imperial remnant. We also know that in the late Legacy era, specifically the Legacy comics, that basically every major faction had moved to smaller, flexible warships rather than dreadnoughts, or even big, slugged-out capital ships, so it's consistent with the beginning of that doctrinal shift. But what do you think? Does a smaller, nimbler pocket Star Destroyer make sense, or should the Empire instead have focused on an Imperial 3? Do you think I'm wrong about the Turbulent being meant as a general replacement for the Imp line, or was it more of a supplementary vessel? One thing worth noting is that besides for the Megador, Pelion always had an Imperial Star Destroyer as his flagship, including the Right to Rule and the Chimera. Today's question of the day comes from Halo Fans Unite, who says he or she would like to start reading Star Wars Legends but doesn't know where. Well, I've got some good news. As I announced yesterday, I will be starting a Star Wars Legends podcast-style book club with my good friend Corey Loses. I'll link the announcement video so you guys can get a full idea of what's going on, but our first book will be The Truce at Bakura, which I personally think is a great place to get into Star Wars Legends. I've also done a full video on my Star Wars Legends reading recommendations generally. I'll also try to remember to link that, but we'll see. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like and leave a comment. It would mean a lot to me. YouTube's been hard on my videos, or maybe I've just not been making as good stuff recently, so if you could help out anyway, share the video, give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, turn notifications on, print the script out and flyer it around your city, whatever, it would really help out. Anyway, until next time guys, this has been Eckhart's Ladder. Be safe, have a great day, and of course, may the Force be with you.